Hey there, welcome back to Twisted Hood. Here, we unravel the most fascinating and gripping crime stories that will keep you hooked. If you're as obsessed with true crime as we are, show some love by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and subscribing to the channel. Trust us, you won't want to miss the twists and turns we have coming your way. A rare and disturbing case unfolded. One where 3 levels of Indian courts, the Sessions Court, the High Court, and even the Supreme Court, initially converged on a single, devastating verdict. Then, in an unprecedented twist, the Supreme Court, the highest judicial authority, reversed its own decision. This is not just a tale of legal reversals. It is the chilling story of how law enforcement effectively murdered a case, leaving 6 innocent men to languish under the shadow of death for 13 agonizing years. Imagine living with the Damocles sword of execution hanging over your head. This was a reality for 6 men wrongly convicted of murder. They lived in constant fear, each night a potential prelude to their last morning. One of them, in a later interview, described the feeling after the Supreme Court upheld their death sentence. It was like an enormous python coiled around his chest, a constant, suffocating weight of impending doom. They lived for years with this monstrous fear, never knowing when death would finally claim them. This relentless terror stole their lives long before any executioner could. The nightmare began on June 5, 2003, in a small town near Nashik, Maharashtra. 5 members of an impoverished family were brutally murdered in their home. Of the 7 family members, only an elderly mother and her son survived. The assailants had ransacked the house, making off with a meager amount of cash and jewelry. The 5-fold homicide sent shockwaves through the community. The police investigation commenced, focusing initially on the 2 eyewitnesses, the mother and son. They recounted seeing 7 or 8 men armed with knives and sticks who attacked the family before looting the house. Crucially, they claimed they could identify the perpetrators, as their faces were not covered. Initially, the police believed they had an open and shut case. But as days turned into weeks with no leads, a senior officer devised a plan. He ordered the compilation of a photo album containing images of known criminals and suspects within a 100-kilometer radius of Nashik. The mother and son were shown the album. After hours of scrutiny, they identified 4 men, claiming they were among the assailants. Both witnesses independently pointed out the same 4 individuals. The police seemed to have a breakthrough. However, no arrests followed. The reason remains shrouded in mystery. 10 days later, in a surprising turn, the police announced to the media that they had solved the case, arresting 6 men in connection with the murders. These 6, Ambaraz, Laxman, Bapu, Ankush, Raja, Raju, and Suresh Shinde, all between 17 and 30 years old, were presented to the mother and son. To everyone's astonishment, both witnesses identified all 6 as the murderers. The police had their suspects, their eyewitness testimony, and seemingly their closure. But there were glaring inconsistencies. The 6 men arrested were not among the 4 initially identified from the police album. Furthermore, while the initial suspects were local to the area, these 6 came from a village 300 kilometers away, leading simple lives as daily wage laborers. How could these men, with limited resources and no history of traveling far from home, have committed the murders? And what of the original 4 suspects? They vanished from the narrative, never arrested or even mentioned in subsequent reports. The case proceeded to court. In 2006, the Sessions Court in Pune delivered its verdict. All 6 men were sentenced to death. They maintained their innocence, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The verdict was appealed to the Bombay High Court, which in 2007 upheld the death sentence for 3 of the men, commuting the other 3 to life imprisonment, deeming their involvement less direct. The case then reached the Supreme Court. In 2009, the highest court delivered a devastating blow. Overturning the High Court's partial commutation, they sentenced all 6 men to death. The python tightened its grip. The men lived in perpetual dread, their lives reduced to waiting for the inevitable. Then, a Bombay-based NGO, providing legal aid to the underprivileged, took up their case. After reviewing the evidence, they were convinced of the men's innocence and filed a review petition in the Supreme Court. The wheels of justice turned agonizingly slowly. It took 9 years for the Supreme Court to finally agree to re-examine the case. 15 years had passed since the murders, 15 years the men spent in prison, facing imminent execution. In March 2019, the Supreme Court delivered a landmark judgment. A 3-judge bench meticulously reviewed every piece of evidence, finally uncovering the truth. The case had been manipulated from the very beginning. The court highlighted several critical flaws: the complete disregard for the initial identification of the 4 men from the police album, the implausibility of the 6 men traveling 300 kilometers to commit the crime, given their financial circumstances and established alibis, the lack of any recovered stolen items connecting them to the scene, and most disturbingly, the mother and son's admission that they only identified the 6 because the police had assured them they were the culprits. The Supreme Court concluded that a grave miscarriage of justice had occurred. These men had spent 16 years behind bars, living under the constant threat of death, all due to a flawed police investigation. The court overturned its previous verdict, acquitting all 6 men. The Maharashtra government was ordered to pay each man 5 lakh rupees in compensation and a monthly allowance until they found stable employment, acknowledging the immense damage inflicted upon their lives. The 6 men were finally free, but their ordeal had left deep scars. Many returned to find their families shattered, their homes destroyed, and their reputations irrevocably tarnished. They faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives after 16 years lost to a system that had failed them. But the story doesn't end there. On June 5, 2003, 5 people were brutally murdered. While 6 innocent men were wrongly imprisoned, the real killers remained free, perhaps even watching from the shadows, mocking the very justice system they evaded. This is a chilling truth. While justice was finally served for 6 men, it remains elusive for the 5 victims whose case was so tragically and deliberately mishandled. That's it in this crime thriller episode. We'll be back soon with more such exciting crime stories. Until then, take care of yourself, stay healthy, and make sure to hit that subscribe button so you're ready for what's next. See you soon.